Okay. So chapters 10 and 11 really cover a lot of those same themes. I was quoting 8 and 9 that whole time, but I was jumping ahead to chapters 10 and 11. So there's not a lot in 10 and 11 other than what I've just explained. I'm scanning them now to see if there's anything I left out. Nope. Nothing left out until we get to pages 64 and 65. Okay. Number and wisdom, Augustine says, are somehow one and the same thing. As the Bible says, wisdom reaches from end to end powerfully and disposes of all things sweetly. Just in the same way that number reaches from end to end powerfully, since we can count everything, and disposes all things sweetly because it orders all things in a good way. Think about what a wreck your life would be if you couldn't count. Okay. And then Augustine says, look at how beautiful and ordered this world is. There's nothing which you can't count. He says, every object, even the lowest or least object, has a number. You can count it. This pencil I have, this old pencil that I'm looking at now on my desk, it's all beat up, okay? It has a number. Another way to put this is there's a truth even about this crummy old pencil. How did it get so beat up? It's because I traveled a lot with it. Why is it so short? Because I wrote so many true statements down with it, right? And then had to sharpen it. Everything has truth about it. From the lowest to the highest. Because God has put his thumbprint of number of truth on everything in the world. That is, the whole world is ordered and arranged. Right? And I would just point out that science doesn't in fact give us the laws of the physical world. I know that's what it seems like, right? It doesn't in fact give us the laws of the physical world. It shows us the truth that humans can discover in the physical world. Think about it. Animals don't do science. They can't do science, but they are of the physical world. Chemicals can't do chemistry. Physical objects know nothing of gravity. They know nothing of the laws of motion. You can see those things in the world, though, that the world itself cannot see in them. Why? Because God arranged it so that you were basically, metaphorically, sitting on a hill looking at these beautiful physical objects, and that you could tell true stories about them, science, that you could say which ones are better than other ones. Oh, a bull in a china shop is worse than a cow that gives milk. That's ethics. Okay, that's a guide to how to live your life. And that you could look up the hill, the higher part of the hill where you don't sit, to the wise man who's, they always sit on the top of the mountain and meditate. And say, I wouldn't mind being like him one day. And then you could look past the wise man into the clouds and see the sun shining through. And say, that's where the wise person gets all their power from. The sun or God. There's an order, right? An up and a down in this world. Number or truth allows us to see that order. And who put number in the world? Who let scientific laws of nature be knowable by human beings, but not by the nature itself? God. Okay. Now, final point is this, 65. That metaphor I just did where there's things in the valley that are beneath you, but they're still pretty good because you can count them. They're beautiful. There's truth about them. There's ethical lessons to be learned there, that like the cow that gives milk is better than the bull in the china shop, right? But we lose sight of that sometimes, right? Often we get so distracted by looking down at the fun and the beautiful and the interesting and pleasurable things in the valley that we forget that we ourselves are above those things. And certainly when we're looking down into the valley beneath us, we often have our back turned on God and the wise person, right? So this is what Augustine says, top of 65. He says, you see how common it is that people consider gold more precious than the golden light of a lamp. But truly, in comparison to gold, the light of the lamp is better. Gold is lesser, should be scorned rather than the light of the lamp, which is metaphorically truth. He says, that's the way of this world. The lesser object receives more honor. Because even a beggar may light a lamp, while few people have gold. And that's the way of this world. The things which are truly accessible to all of us. Truth, love, acting morally, which, remember, Augustine says is difficult to act morally, but it's always within your power. God, truth, morality, family, community, these things which almost everyone has already, those are the truly good things. And the things which are even better than that, well, sorry, nothing's better than God, but some of those things are ranked higher than the others. We often forget about completely and chase paper, which we call money, and metal, which we call gold, coins, etc. Or we chase the opinions of other people who don't really know what's good or bad because they're down there in the valley, fighting with each other. So you have to reevaluate your priorities, Augustine says. Here's another thing Augustine says, 69. We're going to chapter 14 now. You never lose truth and wisdom against your will. Okay, you cannot be physically separated from your mind, so you can't be physically separated from the truth and wisdom you have. Okay. Here's the thing, though, is all the physical things in the world you can be physically separated from. The food of truth can never be stolen, he says. Therefore, it's not subject to envy or jealousy. Rarely will someone be actually mad at you because you're smart. They might be mad if you got a better grade than them on a curve, or they might be mad if you sort of tell them that you're smarter than them, right? But no one really begrudges you taking wisdom. Why? Because when you take wisdom, you don't actually take a piece of it away from someone else. That's what taste does. When you know something, you see it with your mind's eye. It's not like you stand between it and someone else and block their view from their mind's eye. So we can all participate and share in it equally. In fact, that's how Augustine would rather you spoke about it. You don't take knowledge, because that implies taking away from someone else. You share in it and you participate in it. So once more, chapter 14 summarizes in all these nice metaphors the differences between physical knowing and physical objects, which are often the target of our lust and desire, and mental objects, things that are bigger than us. Okay. It says, even in hearing, there's nothing permanent. You're only touched by fleeting notes. And he says, even if you could see a beautiful sight forever, he says, seeing things is what we share with animals, right? So that can't be the highest, best thing. Once more, just think about this in terms of how you evaluate things. He's giving you the abstract building blocks for how to evaluate your life. So commonly in Christianity it said, yeah, you're not supposed to have sex outside of marriage. And a lot of people today go, but why? They're like, oh, the church, it's so fuddy-duddy, right? Well, the church may or may not be wrong on this, but Christianity has reasons for this. Now, if you don't investigate the reasons, it probably just sounds like mom and dad and priests and pastors and whatnot telling you can't have fun. But the basic point is this, is what's better in general? Something we share with animals, which is sex, or something which only human beings have, real families built on trust, respect, permanent bond, that can grow a family, etc. I mean, just ask yourself, what animals do when they're in heat versus what people do when they make a family, which one's better and more important? The family one, right? Okay, so there's a reason given for why you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. Now, here's the thing. I know not everyone wants to hear that, or some of you aren't Christian, and so you go, well, good, they have their reasons, I have mine. Right? The point is, though, is that with a philosopher, they're always trying to give good reasons why. Now, you might not like the reasons, and you're allowed to dispute them, but you know how you do that? Through your own reasons. Through your own reasons, which have to be better, more compelling, more true. Right? So nobody just makes up what they think is true. And Augustine's not just making up these things, he's giving you reasons why 3 is bigger than 1. Unless you can show him that it's not really 3, or 3 is not really bigger than 1, then he's got a reason for why he lives the way he does, and the rest of us are just like animals, doing whatever comes naturally, but without any good reason. And another way to think about this, a little more practically minded, is that all these things which are lower than you are things that you will eventually lose. Money will be stolen from you or spent, or if it's not stolen and you don't spend it all, when you die, you can't take it with you. The pure act, the physical act of sex is over after a while, right? That's why people feel compelled to repeat it and do it more than once, is because it just doesn't last. The delights of eating food or of wine, they last for a few hours and then they're over. And you have to do them again and again and again, right? It's an endless loop, the stuff of this world, right? It's like trying to fill up a leaky jar, right? You put something good in the jar and then it always disappears, so you have to fill up the jar again and again and again. It's this metaphor that shows up multiple times in philosophy. But things of the better world, you never lose. You never lose the truth. You never lose God. You never really lose family. Even if they kick you out, eventually they'll take you back in, right? So just at a practical level, love the things that you can't lose. And then your heart won't be broken, because your heart's broken when you lose something which you love. If you attach yourself to perishable things of this world, you will suffer and your heart will break when they're taken away from you. You will also be punished for the sin of loving the lower, not necessarily by hellfire and damnation and, angels torturing you, but that you'll be stuck with the lower thing. Right? So speaking on those ethical issues, we go to Book 2, Chapter 18. So this is the theme of Chapter 18. We move back to the will. Okay, and the question is, if the will alone is what leads to sin, is the will itself bad? Okay, and if so, why was it given? That is, was God wrong to give us the will? Think about Eden. Wouldn't Eden, the Garden of Eden, stayed a nice place if we didn't have free will? If God would have just said, hey, don't eat the apple, and we were somehow unable to eat the apple, it would have been great. We would have stayed in Eden. Literally everything would have been perfect, right? Okay. And this is Augustine's response. Okay. We've covered this stuff in Book 2, Chapter 1, these first 2 points. He says, it was not given to you for sin, so God's intent was good. He gave it to you so you could choose things like starting a family and to read more philosophy. So God's intent is good, so God's not bad, just as his intent isn't bad. Second point, without the will, you couldn't live rightly or morally. In the same way, if a dog doesn't eat an apple that it's forbidden to eat, or if a table doesn't curse and swear at people, you don't get credit for that. They don't get credit for that because they can't choose to do otherwise. A dog on a leash doesn't bite anyone? Yeah, because it can't. So the only way that you can be rewarded for good acts is that they're truly good, and they're only truly good if you chose to do them because they're good. We've covered those 2 points. Here's the new points. Okay. Page 78, for instance. Augustine says, let's review what we've done. He says, the body is lower and less than the mind and the will, correct? Yes, we've covered all that. So animal bodies, including your own physical body and your own sensations, are lower and less good than your mind, which can count using number, and the claim here is also your will. Okay, and he says, but the body's lower, but it should still exist, right? Bodies are still good. They're just not as good as human minds. So a few things here. One is that for something to be less good doesn't mean that it's evil or wrong. Precisely if it's less good, it means it's good, just not the best. Another point that that Augustine makes, and this is a point he makes elsewhere, but I think it's in our reading in either book 1 or book 2. And it's a nice point to make anyways. He says, well, look, isn't the world more beautiful for having more variety in it? Yes. So what God did when he made the world, he didn't just make one awesome thing, human beings. He also made tigers, because it's pretty cool that there's tigers, right? And he made snails. They're not as cool as tigers, but still, isn't the world more beautiful, more interesting, more true things in the world if there's truths about tigers, humans, and about snails? Yeah. Okay, and he says, just because the snail is less good than the tiger, do you think the snail should not exist? And you obviously say, no, I want snails and tigers. Okay. And he says, boom, exactly. Apply all that to the will. The human will, Augustine says, is above animal bodies. But regardless, the point is that it's not perfect because it chooses to sin. And Augustine says, if you want to get rid of everything in the world because it's not perfect, or if you want to say God is wrong because he gave imperfect things out, then literally what you're saying is only God should exist. It's like you saying, well, animals aren't as good as me, and my will isn't as good as God. That is, my will is sinful and God is not sinful. Therefore, my will should not exist, and God was evil for making my will. Animals also should not exist since they're not as good as mine. God was evil for making animals. You see how even if you're not a religious person, that sounds goofy, just flat out wrong. Right? That's like saying, because 3 pieces of pizza aren't as good as 6, 3 pieces of pizza are evil and should be destroyed. Whoa, hold up with that. That's my pizza. That's my will. Imperfect, but still worthy of existence. Okay. Next point. So this is the 4th point. Again, the first is God's intent. Second is that you need the will to do good things that you can't do without the will. Third is the one we just did, that just because something's lower doesn't mean it's evil. Lower good should exist too. So an imperfect will, lower than God's perfect will, should still exist. 4th point is this. Okay, he says, the body too can be misused, and objects, physical objects, can be misused. He says, feet are good in general, but you can use your feet to kick someone. Eyes are good in general, but you can look at, lusty objects with them. But you'd never say, right, God gave me feet that can be used to kick people. Curse you, God. God gave me eyes on which I can look at philosophy books, magazines about my favorite subjects, the internet, beautiful artworks. But one time I looked at pornography, so curse you, God. You see, again, if you follow the idea to its logical conclusion, it seems sort of absurd. You wouldn't say sinful, lusty eyes shouldn't exist. Mean, violent feet should not exist. Or you wouldn't say eyes should not exist because eyes sometimes look at bad things. Feet should not exist because sometimes they kick things, like because they kick people and puppies. No, you'd say don't kick with your feet. Don't look at bad things with your eyes. So it's not the kind of object, the will, which should be blamed. It's the improper use of it. Now here I want to ask you a question. Okay? It's fine to say that about feet. It's fine to even say that about eyes. But think about how people actually use their will. People want bad things all the time. I mean, I don't remember the last time I kicked someone out of spite. I was probably like 12 years old. But I won't get into it, but I'm sure I've thought something immoral, probably even done something immoral since I was 12. Yeah, let's be honest. Been immoral a few times since 12. So maybe Augustine's doing sort of a sleight of hand here, like a little trick with the comparison. Eyes rarely do evil. Human wills do evil all the time. Literally from Adam and Eve, or if you want to go a non-religious route, our animal ancestors killing and stealing and all that all the time, up to the present. People lie all the time, including to their spouses and family members. People are sneaky and try to fool people into doing things that they don't want to do. People don't just think about sex all the time, they have sex they shouldn't have all the time. People are greedy. They care about little more than their money. They say they care about family more, and then they work on the weekend, miss their kids' games for a few extra bucks. And people tell themselves, oh, that's for the kids, I'm just trying to support my family. But then what do? They move into a bigger house. Well, the kids don't usually care about the bigger house, do they? Or they use it to take a family vacation to Aruba. The kids don't want to go Aruba, right? They don't really care. Anyhow, point is, I'm saying, hey, maybe Augustine's wrong. The analogy seems to hold, but feet aren't used for sin all the time. The will is used for sin, lusty thoughts, desire for money, lying, even things like murder. Our jails are filled with people. Maybe the will is so prone to being misused that it's actually pretty sketchy. Okay? So, part of the question I want to ask you first is the general one. Does our will seem more likely to be misused than other objects? Okay, and to put a slightly more detailed point on it, since the will is what is the cause for Augustine of the truly awful things. Okay, because the eye doesn't cause you to look at pornography. The foot doesn't cause you to kick someone. The will does all that stuff. Isn't the will, in fact, worse than all those things? Because it's involved in so many sins. Right? So maybe the will is actually worse than the body. Augustine wants to say mental or soul-based things like the ability to count and will are always better than the worst or the best body. The worst will is better than the best body. Because it's of a totally higher order. Okay? But don't you think, animals are innocent? You think a sinful person is better than an innocent animal? The little puppy, it's never hurt anyone. Right? So what do you think about that? Do you think that a truly sinful, bad person is still better than an animal? Okay. Now, just briefly, pause the recording if you haven't yet and tell me your thoughts about that, because I have a little follow-up. The follow-up is this, is Augustine would just say two things. Okay? One is that the guilty, sinful criminal, because of what the will is, it's free, can always choose tomorrow to start being a good person. The animal never gets a chance to choose to be good. It stays at its genuinely good, but its good level of existence, and it only stays there. You and I can choose to go up and down. So the wickedest person tomorrow could have a moment of a crisis of conscience and say, I'll never do that again. I'm leaving the mob. I'm going to stop cooking meth. And I'm going to stop kicking people with my feet. So see, they have a chance to return to highness and goodness in a way animals don't. Second point, he would definitely say that first one. This second one is me, but I think he would agree with it. I would just say, which one would you rather be? A sinful person or an animal? If you'd prefer to be a human being, there's a hint there. This isn't exactly an argument, so it's no guarantee, but there's a hint there that you think there's something better even in being a bad person. That it's better to be a bad person than a good animal. So all 19 says it builds all this stuff we've had together, okay? And it says the will, even the sinful will, is still good. It's not the greatest good, which is number, God, justice, etc., but it's not the lowest good either, which is technically inanimate objects are the lowest good. Animate objects would be the second lowest good, right, etc. Okay. And once more, this theme that it's better to have snails and tigers than just tigers, even though tigers are better. It's page 81. He says, God's goodness ought to be praised more in the case of the greatest goods than in that of the intermediate ones, and more in the case of the intermediate middle goods than the lowest. But, this is the point, more since he made all goods than if had he not bestowed all. And on 82 we have where Augustine says explicitly some of the themes I've said before. Sin is when you turn away from the immutable, eternal, common goods like truth and human community towards its own private good, either something external to itself like money or lower than itself like animal desires. It turns to its own private good when it desires to be its own master. Think about it, Augustine says. You are not the master of your own life is. God is. And you are not the master of the way you move about the world. The truth is. Number is your guide, and it guides you like the person with sight leads the blind. It guides you like a human guides an ox or other beast of burden. You are not master of the world. Truth is the master of the world. Now, you will never be God, but if you follow truth, which is the master of the human world, you will become better. The blind become as if they can see when they follow the master who sees, the master of truth, which is the light itself. So this is what sin is for Augustine. He says, those who are proud, meddlesome, that is, they messed with other people, and lustful, are caught up in another life, which compared to the higher life of living a godly, good life, is death. So technically in books 1 and 2, the only punishment we hear about is this worldly punishment. If you choose a life of money and sex, you choose the lower life. You live an animal life rather than a human life, or a dead life, a non-animated life, instead of a living life. That's your punishment. I think honestly, at least in what we read in books 1 and 2, and in the bulk of them, you don't see heaven, you don't see hell. When you hear about punishment, it's about this life being as if it's a walking dead life, dead man walking kind of stuff. That's your punishment. You get weighted down by false goods which you're going to lose one day. And you do that through your own choice. Now we'll end this recording with chapter 20 of book 2. And this is where we get some of the metaphysics sort of stuff. These are like the deep thoughts, right? Evodius still says, okay, but if God gave the will and God's intent was for it to be good, and God gave it as good as it could be, like he gave it as a new gift, not as a beat up old raggedy gift, but a new gift, then still, why would human beings want to sin? If they'd never known sin before, basically the point is, we sort of established that God did not give the will pre-programmed to sin. That's not his intent. The will is free, so it can just as easily choose the good as the lower. Okay? So why did the first human beings sin? If there wasn't some perversion or defect built in already, then why would the will want badness? Okay? And Augustine says, you know what? I have to admit, I sort of don't know. It's a little hard to say. But he says, hold firm to your faith that there is some sort of answer. Okay? And this is what he says. He says, I think it's this. Okay? Everything good is from God. Okay? Everything real is from God, and reality is good. He says, sin, though, is a turning away from the good. It's a defective movement. Okay? He says, but defects come from nothing. So think about what an error or a mistake is. It's the absence of full knowledge. It's inadequate or partial understanding. So if you look across the street and you say, hey, there's Professor Davidson, I recognize his car. It turns out it's not me. Okay? You still had partial knowledge. You knew what kind of car I drove. You saw a car. You were correct that it sort of looked like mine. So where's the error come from? The defect or missing truth. Oh, you didn't notice the license plate number was different or something. Please tell me you don't know my license plate number. Okay? So that's all. The will is the same way. Sin does not come from scooping up a big chunk of evil in the world. Strictly for Augustine, hold on to your hats, nothing is evil. Even the most perverse, deliberate, lowest thing you can possibly do. is not evil. It is just highly lacking in goodness. Everything is partially good, or else it couldn't even exist. For something to exist, even the murderer in the act of murdering, there's still something good there. There's an animal body, right? That's good. There's iron moving through the blood. That's inanimate objects. That's cool that that's happening. There's some inkling of goodness in everything. So this is what Augustine says. He says, the will does not have some evil or badness mixed into it by God or by anything else. It is just not full to the brim with goodness. It's merely imperfect. But imperfect for Augustine does not ever mean that there's an actual blemish or flaw in the thing, but just that it's lacking something. See, there's a big difference between a pile of gold that could be higher and a pile of gold that, I don't know, has like a cockroach in it, right? Like a bad thing mixed into it. Augustine says perverse wills are not filled with evil. There's just an absence of God or an absence of truth in them. Literally says they turn away from the good towards the less good. But again, the less good, not the evil. So for Augustine, good and evil are not opposites. They are degrees of reality. The more real and the more true something is, the more good it is. God's the most real. He was here first. He's also the most true. He's the Word, right? You showed up later. You're not as big as God. You're not as strong as God. You're less real. You're also less wise than God is. But those aren't evils. They're just that you don't rise up to the full level of perfection. So the will is not evil. It does not lust for evil. It's just that it doesn't always desire the good. Imperfect rather than evil. Okay, and we'll end this recording here on book 2, and we'll pick up with some of book 3 next time. Okay, thank you. In the next recording, I mean.